Have you ever met someone whose entire life goal is measuring the height of your fescue grass with a sterile, state-issued ruler? If you haven't, consider yourself incredibly lucky. If you have, you already know Brenda. Brenda was the president of the Whispering Sands Homeowners Association in Scottsdale, Arizona, a neighborhood so aggressively beige and manicured that a rogue dandelion was treated like a Level 4 biohazard. Brenda drove a golf cart with a flashing amber light on top. She wore mirrored sunglasses. She carried a clipboard with the menacing authority of a dictator holding the nuclear launch codes. And Brenda was about to become my absolute worst nightmare, purely because I had the audacity to try and be a good dad. It all started on a perfectly innocent Thursday in mid-April. The Arizona heat hadn't quite reached that soul-crushing, melt the soles of your shoes level yet. My two boys, aged 7 and 9, had been begging me for a trampoline for roughly 3 consecutive years. I had finally caved. I spent 4 agonizing hours sweating through my t-shirt, pinching my fingers in heavy-duty galvanized steel springs, and deciphering instructions that appeared to have been translated from Swedish to ancient Aramaic, and then finally to English. But when it was done, it was a 14-foot masterpiece of bouncy, kinetic joy. The kids were ecstatic. They spent the entire weekend launching themselves into the stratosphere, laughing until they couldn't breathe. It was idyllic. It was perfect. It lasted exactly 72 hours. I came home from work on Monday afternoon to find a notice taped to my front door. It wasn't just taped. It was secured with exactly 4 pieces of heavy-duty packing tape, making sure it would rip the fresh paint off my mahogany front door when I peeled it off. The paper itself was an aggressive, headache-inducing shade of neon pink. Cease and desist. Immediate compliance required. I ripped it off, wincing as a chip of paint fluttered to the porch. I read the terrifying block text. According to the Whispering Sands Architectural Control Committee, I was harboring an unauthorized, non-compliant, and visually offensive recreational apparatus. I had 48 hours to remove the trampoline, or I would be subjected to a fine of $100 per day, retroactively applied, plus a potential lien on my property. I stared at the pink slip of paper. My blood pressure spiked so fast I could hear my heartbeat in my teeth. $100 a day? For a toy? I looked over the block wall into my backyard. I could just see the very top of the safety netting peeking over the top of the masonry. You literally couldn't even see the actual jumping mat from the street. I didn't even take off my work shoes. I marched straight down the perfectly paved, utterly characterless street to Brenda's house. She lived in a corner lot, naturally, giving her maximum vantage points to spy on the neighborhood. Her front yard featured a rock garden that looked like it had been arranged with a laser level. I rang the doorbell. It chimed an overly cheerful melody. The door swung open, and there she stood. Brenda was wearing a pastel tracksuit that matched her perfectly coiffed, heavily hairsprayed bob. She looked at me, looked at the crumpled pink paper in my fist, and let out a long, theatrical sigh, as if dealing with me was the greatest burden she had ever been forced to bear. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with the kind of fake sweetness that instantly rots your teeth. "Brenda, what is this?" I held up the paper. "That is a formal notice of violation," she stated, adjusting her glasses. "Section 4, paragraph B of the community bylaws. You are harboring an illegal structure." "It's a trampoline, Brenda." I threw my hands up. "It's a backyard toy for my kids. It's not a roller coaster. It's not a Ferris wheel. It's literally just a bouncy circle." "It's an eyesore," she countered sharply, the fake sweetness vanishing. It disrupts the visual harmony of whispering sands. The rules are very clear. No above-ground recreational structures are permitted without prior written consent from the Architectural Committee. And I can assure you consent for that monstrosity would never be granted. Visual harmony? Brenda, my backyard is surrounded by a 6-foot block wall. You can barely see the top of the net. The net is a neon blue, and it is offensive, Brenda snapped. Take it down, or we fine you. $100 a day. It's out of my hands. The rules are the rules. She stepped back and began to close the door. Have a blessed day. The heavy oak door clicked shut in my face. I stood there on her perfectly swept porch for a full minute, vibrating with sheer, unadulterated rage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to kick her laser-leveled rocks into the street. But as the anger boiled, it started to distill into something much colder and much more dangerous. Spite. Pure, concentrated, weaponized spite. The rules are the rules, she had said. Fine. If Brenda wanted to play the rules game, we were going to play the rules game. That night, after the kids were asleep, I didn't watch television. I didn't read a novel. I brewed a pot of coffee so strong it could have dissolved a spoon, opened my laptop, and logged into the HOA's clunky password-protected portal. I downloaded the complete Whispering Sands covenants, conditions, and restrictions, all 412 pages of it. Did I want to spend my Friday night reading dense, poorly formatted property law written by power-tripping retirees? No. Was it worth it to see Brenda's face when I legally dismantled her little fiefdom? Absolutely. I started reading. I read through the restrictions on exterior paint colors, only shades of beige, tan, and desert sand. I read through the restrictions on mailbox fonts. I read through the bizarrely specific rules regarding the allowable diameter of potted plants on front porches. And finally, around 2 a.m., my eyes burning and my brain turning to mush, I found the Holy Grail. Section 4. Paragraph B. I read it once. I read it twice. I leaned back in my chair and started to laugh. It was a slow, villainous chuckle that echoed in the quiet kitchen. The exact wording was, "No above-ground recreational structures, including but not limited to playhouses, treehouses, and trampolines, shall be erected, placed, or maintained on any lot." Above ground. The bylaws specifically, explicitly, undeniably banned above-ground trampolines. They didn't ban trampolines as a concept. They simply regulated their elevation relative to the Earth's crust. If I dug a hole and put the trampoline in the ground, it was no longer an above-ground structure. It was flush with the earth. But I knew Brenda. I knew that if I just dug a hole, she would cite me for unauthorized landscaping, or unauthorized excavation, or operating an unapproved quarry. I needed an ironclad defense for the hole itself. I needed state law to back me up. I opened a new tab and started researching Arizona property statutes. Arizona is a desert. Water is a massive, heavily legislated deal. The state government desperately wants people to conserve water. I started digging into the Arizona Revised Statutes, ARS, specifically looking at laws regarding HOAs and landscaping. At 3:45 a.m., I struck gold. Solid, unbreakable, legally binding gold. ARS Section 33-1816. This beautiful, magnificent piece of legislation dictated that a homeowners association cannot prohibit a homeowner from installing drought-resistant landscaping, which explicitly includes rainwater harvesting retention basins or swales designed to capture runoff and prevent flooding. Under state law, the HOA's power to ban such environmentally conscious earthworks was severely restricted. My mind began racing, connecting the dots in a web of glorious, malicious compliance. I wasn't going to just sink a trampoline. I was going to excavate a massive state-protected rainwater retention basin in my backyard. I was going to build an environmentally crucial piece of infrastructure to save the Arizona desert. And then, because an open 10-foot crater in a backyard is a massive liability, I would simply secure the top of my basin with a highly tensile, permeable safety cover. A safety cover that just so happened to have springs. The plan was flawless. It was bulletproof. It was going to drive Brenda absolutely out of her mind. First thing Monday morning, I didn't go to work. I took a personal day. I stood in my backyard with a can of white spray paint, marking out a massive 14-foot circle right in the center of the lawn. Then, I picked up my phone and called Mike. Mike was a local landscaping contractor I had met at a neighborhood barbecue a few years back. He was the kind of guy who drove a 3/4-ton diesel truck held together largely by duct tape, rust, and sheer mechanical stubbornness. Mike didn't like HOAs. Mike didn't like rules. Mike liked digging holes and getting paid in cash. He pulled up to my house 2 hours later, leaving his truck idling loudly in the street. He strolled into the backyard, took off his grease-stained baseball cap, and stared at the massive white circle I had painted on the grass. "You want me to dig a hole here?" Mike asked, scratching his jaw. "In a perfectly flat level yard? Why? You burying a body?" "Because the HOA banned trampolines, Mike," I said, leaning against the block wall. Mike froze. He slowly turned his head to look at me, a mischievous, deeply chaotic grin spreading across his face. "Say no more, boss. Say no more. I'll go get the backhoe." At 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, the quiet, aggressively peaceful serenity of Whispering Sands was violently shattered. The ground literally shook as Mike unloaded a yellow Caterpillar mini excavator from a flatbed trailer right in front of my house. The diesel engine roared, belching a small cloud of black smoke into the pristine Scottsdale air. The metal treads clanked and screeched as he drove it up my driveway, through the RV gate, and into the backyard. It was glorious. The noise, the dust, the sheer, unadulterated chaos. Mike didn't waste any time. He dropped the heavy steel bucket into the pristine fescue grass and ripped up a massive chunk of earth. The operation had officially begun. Within 20 minutes, there was a mountain of dirt piled up next to a rapidly growing crater. I was standing on my back patio, sipping a mug of coffee and watching the destruction with immense satisfaction, when I heard the screech of golf cart tires locking up out front. A moment later, the side gate rattled violently. Brenda came storming into the backyard, literally sprinting in fuzzy pink slippers, furiously waving her ever-present clipboard. Her face was the color of a ripe tomato. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked over the roar of the excavator. "Stop! Stop this machine immediately. You do not have architectural committee approval for a pool. I am calling the police." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the roast. "Good morning, Brenda. It's not a pool." "Then what is it?" she screamed, pointing at the massive, gaping hole in my yard. "You are destroying property values. You are conducting an illegal strip mining operation." "It's an environmentally conscious rainwater retention basin, Brenda," I said smoothly, raising my voice to be heard over the diesel engine. "I'm capturing runoff. I'm doing my part for the desert ecosystem, saving the planet one giant hole at a time. And under ARS Section 33-1816, you literally cannot stop me." Brenda stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a landed bass. She looked at the hole, looked at the mountain of dirt, and looked at Mike, who gave her a cheerful wave from the cab of the excavator before plunging the bucket back into the earth. You will be hearing from our attorneys," she sputtered, turning on her heel and storming back out the gate. "Have a blessed day," I called after her. By noon, the crater was 10 feet deep and perfectly round. Mike and his crew had started hitting an incredibly tough layer of caliche clay, pulling up weird, charred-looking rocks. To add insult to injury, my next-door neighbor, a nice older guy named Gary, peeked his head over the wall to see what all the noise was about. "Hey, doing some landscaping?" Gary asked, eyeing the massive trench. "Actually, Gary," I said, keeping a perfectly straight face, "we found some magnetic anomalies. We're excavating a historic meteor impact site. Unbelievable find, really." Gary's eyes went wide. "No kidding, a meteor?" "Yeah, keeping it quiet for now, but the geological survey guys are going to lose their minds." I knew Gary was the neighborhood gossip. Within 2 hours, the rumor spread like wildfire. Kids were riding their bikes past my house, pointing and whispering about the alien spaceship buried in my backyard. But Brenda wasn't done. Not by a long shot. She couldn't stop me on landscaping grounds, so she decided to escalate to the nuclear option. She called the actual authorities. At 2 p.m., a white Scottsdale police SUV rolled up to my curb, its lights flashing silently. 2 very confused-looking police officers stepped out. At the exact same time, a white pickup truck bearing the city seal pulled up behind them. Code enforcement. Brenda had called in a strike team. I walked out to the driveway to meet them, wiping dirt off my jeans. Brenda was standing across the street on her driveway, arms crossed, watching with a look of smug victory on her face. She thought she had me. "Afternoon, officers," I said calmly. "How can I help you?" The older cop, a guy with a thick mustache and a name tag that read Miller, hooked his thumbs into his duty belt and looked past me toward the open RV gate. "Sir, we got a frantic call from the HOA president stating you were running an unauthorized heavy machinery strip mining operation in a residential zone. Care to explain?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Officer Miller, does my backyard look like an industrial mine, or does it look like a legally compliant landscaping project?" I gestured for them to follow me. We walked into the backyard. Mike shut off the excavator. The sudden silence was deafening. Officer Miller walked to the edge of the 10-foot crater, peered down into it, and then looked at me. He slowly took off his sunglasses. "Sir, that is a very large hole." "It's a state-protected rainwater harvesting retention basin," I corrected him politely. "State Law 33-1816. Miller looked at the hole again, then looked across the street at a seething Brenda, who was glaring daggers at us. He let out a heavy sigh, the kind of sigh that comes from 20 years of dealing with suburban neighbor disputes. "Looks like a hole full of dirt, ma'am," he muttered, mostly to himself. He turned back to me. "We don't police dirt, sir. As long as you aren't burying anything you shouldn't be, the police department has no jurisdiction here. Have a nice day." He turned and walked away, completely uninterested. Brenda's jaw dropped as the police cruiser pulled away, but the battle wasn't over. The city inspector from Code Enforcement was still standing there, holding a clipboard of his own. He was a younger guy, very serious, wearing a hard hat and a high-vis vest. "The police might not care, but I do," the inspector said flatly. "You've excavated a drop-off greater than 30 inches without a perimeter fence. That is a massive fall hazard. It's a violation of municipal safety codes. You need a safety barrier, a solid fence or a structurally rated heavy-duty net secured over the top of this cavity, or I am red tagging this project and shutting you down right now." I looked at him. I looked at the hole. And then I smiled. The trap was set. "You mean," I said slowly, emphasizing every word, "I am required by city code to install a highly tensile, permeable safety net attached to a steel frame to completely cover the basin and prevent accidental falls?" The inspector frowned, slightly confused by my enthusiasm. Yes, exactly that. It needs to be weight-bearing and secure." "Inspector, you are a lifesaver," I said, shaking his hand vigorously. "I have the exact safety net you are looking for right in my garage." I called Mike and his crew over. We went into the garage and hauled out the dismantled trampoline. The steel ring, the heavy-duty springs, the black jumping mat. We carried the pieces into the backyard. Mike realized what was happening, and he started laughing so hard he had to lean against the block wall to catch his breath. Over the next 2 hours, we assembled the massive steel ring directly over the crater. Because Mike was a professional and an absolute legend, he had dug a small, recessed ledge perfectly around the perimeter of the hole. The steel frame of the trampoline sat flush with the grass. We hooked the springs in. We stretched the black canvas mat tight. When we were finished, it didn't look like a trampoline. Without the tall, ugly blue safety netting or the metal legs sticking up, it looked sleek. It looked modern. It looked like a stealth bomber version of a backyard toy hovering exactly at ground level. The inspector walked over, stepped cautiously onto the black mat, and bounced slightly. It held his weight perfectly. The 10-foot void underneath gave it an incredible drum-like resonance. "Well," the inspector said, scribbling on his clipboard, "it's weight-bearing. It covers the hazard. It allows rainwater to pass through into your retention basin. It's unconventional, but it meets safety compliance." He ripped off a carbon copy sheet and handed it to me. "You're cleared." I took the signed municipal safety clearance form and held it like it was a winning lottery ticket. To completely cement the joke and to drive the final nail into Brenda's coffin, I went to a local trophy shop that afternoon. I spent $45 having a custom brass plaque engraved. I mounted it on a wooden stake and pounded it into the grass right next to the trampoline. It read, "Whispering Sands Neighborhood Meteor Site and Water Retention Facility. Official safety cover required by city code." The kids came home from school that afternoon and lost their minds. They ran out back and immediately started jumping. Because the trampoline was flush with the ground, there was zero risk of them falling off. Because there was a 10-foot acoustic chamber underneath them, every jump sounded like a cinematic explosion. They were bouncing higher than ever before. I was sitting on the patio, enjoying a cold beer and watching them, when my phone buzzed. It was an email notification. "Urgent. Mandatory appearance required." It was a summons to an emergency, closed-door session of the HOA Board of Directors, scheduled for tomorrow evening. The email detailed the charges: deliberate and egregious violation of architectural guidelines, malicious destruction of property, and a formal threat of maximum fines and an immediate lien placed against the deed of my house. Brenda was going for the kill shot. She was trying to take my home. I printed out the email, set it on the kitchen counter, and poured myself another beer. I wasn't scared. I was exhilarated. I had the state law. I had the municipal inspector's sign-off. I had the bylaws memorized. I packed my briefcase like a lawyer preparing for the Supreme Court. I put in the printed CC and RS, heavily highlighted. I put in a copy of ARS Section 33-1816. I put in the signed municipal safety form, and I made a massive, colorful presentation board with diagrams. The showdown was set. The HOA community clubhouse on a Wednesday evening is honestly like the most depressing place on planet Earth. It literally smells like stale Folgers coffee, industrial carpet cleaner, and the crushed dreams of middle management. The fluorescent lights hum with this aggressive, headache-inducing buzz that just makes you want to confess to crimes you didn't even commit. I walked in right at 7 p.m., carrying my briefcase and my giant presentation board tucked under my arm. The board of directors was already seated at a long folding table at the front of the room. Brenda was sitting dead center, looking like a judge at a witch trial. She had her hair sprayed into an immovable helmet, and she was clutching her gavel like it was Excalibur. To her left was Gary, my neighbor, who was clearly only on the board because he had nothing better to do, and to her right was a guy in a cheap suit who I assumed was the HOA's retained attorney. He looked like he literally wanted to be anywhere else. I mean, I guess dealing with neighborhood squabbles isn't exactly the high-stakes corporate law he dreamed of in law school. "You're late!" Brenda snapped, slamming her little wooden gavel against the table. "Sit down. This emergency tribunal is now in session." I honestly couldn't help but smile. "Tribunal? Brenda, this isn't Nuremberg. We're talking about my backyard." "We are talking about your flagrant, malicious disregard for the governing documents of Whispering Sands," she barked, her voice echoing in the empty, poorly decorated room. She pulled a piece of paper from a pristine manila folder. "You are charged with unauthorized excavation, operating an unapproved earth-moving vehicle, creating a public nuisance, and the illegal installation of a banned recreational structure. Specifically, a trampoline." She looked at me, her eyes practically glowing with triumph. "The fine is currently sitting at $1,000, plus we have drafted a lien against your property for the cost of filling in that monstrosity. What do you have to say for yourself?" I took a deep breath, popped the latches on my briefcase, and slowly pulled out my heavily highlighted stack of papers. I felt like a wizard about to cast a spell. "Well, Brenda, I guess I'll start by pleading not guilty to all charges," I said, setting up my presentation board on an easel I had brought from home. I flipped over the white cover sheet to reveal a massive, blown-up photograph of my backyard. It showed the pristine, flat grass and the black, circular safety net sitting perfectly flush with the ground. "Objection!" Brenda yelled, like she literally yelled objection at an HOA meeting. "Board the trampoline! You are hiding the banned structure." "Brenda, there is no above-ground trampoline," I said, tapping the board with a pen. "I direct the board's attention to Section 4, Paragraph B of our beloved CC and RS. It explicitly states no above-ground recreational structures. As you can clearly see in this photograph, my structure is entirely 100% flush with the Earth's crust. It possesses zero verticality. It casts no shadow. By the very definition written in your own rulebook, it is not an above-ground structure." The attorney in the cheap suit leaned forward, adjusting his glasses and squinting at the blown-up photograph. He let out a very soft, very telling, "Word games!" Brenda shrieked, her face turning that familiar shade of ripe tomato. "You dug a massive, dangerous crater in your yard to hide it. That is unauthorized landscaping. We are fining you for the hole." "Ah, the hole," I said, flipping to the second page of my presentation. It was a blown-up text of the Arizona Revised Statutes. "Let's talk about the hole. You see, under ARS Section 33-1816, A homeowners association cannot legally prohibit a property owner from installing drought-resistant landscaping or water conservation measures. This explicitly includes, and I quote, rainwater harvesting retention basins. My 10-foot hole is a legally protected, environmentally critical retention basin designed to save the precious Arizona water table. I looked around the room. Gary was nodding slowly, looking genuinely impressed. "It's true, Brenda," Gary mumbled. "Water is scarce. We gotta do our part." "Shut up, Gary," Brenda snapped. She whipped her head back to me. "Even if, and that is a massive if, even if it is a retention basin, it is a massive open fall hazard. It violates city safety codes. The city will shut you down and fine you into oblivion, and we will tack our fines right on top of theirs." This was it. This was the crescendo, the peak sovereign ruling moment. I literally felt a shiver of pure, unadulterated joy run down my spine. "I am so glad you brought up city safety codes, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, deadpan level. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the pink carbon copy sheet the inspector had given me. I slid it across the folding table toward the lawyer. "Because, you see, an inspector from code enforcement visited my property yesterday." Brenda leaned over the lawyer's shoulder, practically hyperventilating as he read the paper. "The inspector informed me that my water retention basin was a fall hazard," I continued, pacing slowly in front of the table like I was closing a murder trial. "He mandated, under threat of immediate closure, that I install a structurally rated, highly tensile, permeable safety net over the basin to prevent accidental injury. A net that allows rainwater to pass through, but is strong enough to hold human weight." The lawyer looked up from the paper, a look of profound, defeated realization washing over his face. He looked at me, then looked at the photograph of the trampoline mat flush with the grass. "So," I concluded, slapping my hands together. "To summarize, I do not have an above-ground trampoline, so I am not violating HOA bylaws. I have a rainwater retention basin, which is protected by state law and cannot be regulated by this board. And that black bouncy thing on top? That is a mandatory, city-enforced safety barrier. I am simply complying with the law, Brenda. I am being a model citizen." The silence in the clubhouse was absolute. You could literally hear the hum of the fluorescent lights and the ragged, shallow breathing of the HOA president. Brenda looked at the lawyer. "Tell him he's wrong," she whispered desperately. "Tell him we can fine him." The lawyer sighed, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Brenda, he's got us. The CC and Rs specify above ground. State Law 33-1816 preempts our landscaping authority regarding water retention, and he has a signed municipal sign-off classifying the trampoline mat as a compliant safety barrier. If we try to enforce a lien, he will sue us, and he will win, and the association will be on the hook for his legal fees. We have to drop it." But it's a trampoline," she sputtered, a single tear of pure frustration leaking out of her left eye. "It's a safety net, Brenda," I corrected gently, "for the Meteor site. Honestly, I mean, you should come by and see it sometime. It really ties the yard together." Gary let out a loud, barking laugh before covering his mouth with both hands. The lawyer cleared his throat. "The board formally dismisses all charges and fines related to the backyard landscaping project at Lot 412. Meeting adjourned." He slammed the gavel down himself, grabbed his briefcase, and practically sprinted for the exit. I packed up my presentation board, clicked my briefcase shut, and walked out into the warm Arizona evening air. I felt like I was floating. When I pulled into my driveway a few minutes later, I could hear the rhythmic, booming thoom, thoom, thoom echoing over my block wall. The acoustic chamber of the 10-foot dirt crater made every jump on that safety net sound like a cinematic drumbeat. I walked through the RV gate into the backyard. The sun was just starting to set, casting this incredible orange glow over the neighborhood. My two boys were launching themselves into the air, doing flips and laughing hysterically. They had zero idea about the legal warfare that had just been waged to protect their right to catch some serious air. And they shouldn't. That's what being a dad is all about. Over the next few weeks, my backyard honestly became a bit of a local tourist attraction. The neighborhood kids would knock on the door, politely asking if they could come test out the Meteor crater safety net. Even Gary came over one afternoon with a 6-pack of beer and spent 20 minutes just bouncing mildly in the center, staring up at the clouds. I paid exactly $0 in HOA fines. I have a perfectly legal, environmentally conscious water retention basin that keeps the yard from flooding during the monsoon season. My kids have arguably the coolest, safest trampoline in the entire state of Arizona. And the best part? Brenda literally refuses to make eye contact with me. If she's driving her little golf cart down the street and sees me checking the mail, she violently swerves to the other side of the road, staring straight ahead with this magnificent, permanent scowl on her face. And that, my friends, is exactly how you weaponize state landscaping statutes to protect your right to exist in the suburbs. If a tyrannical neighborhood watch tells you that you can't build your life over their ridiculous rules, you just grab a shovel, dig under them, and smile while you do it. Always read the fine print, save your receipts, and remember to keep things legally malicious. Catch you guys on the next one.